Hello there, Alaskans, wherever you are. Welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show, coming to you from somewhere in Alaska. This is the place where we talk about, you guessed it, Alaska, where we keep the mainstream media on their toes and where we are standing up for what's right in a world run by leftists. You can find out more by heading over to mustreadalaska.com and also checking out the Must Read Alaska YouTube channel for some really great content. But first, let's get this party started. What's good, Alaska? This is Scott Levesque, and you're listening to the Daily Dose of the Must Read Alaska podcast. Thank you for joining with us today. Right now, it's earlier in the morning here. It's a little bit dark, obviously, but it's beautiful out. It's wintertime, and Christmas is right around the corner, so I'm excited about that. And listen, I want to say thank you. Again, it's the holiday season. We should be thankful. We're thankful for all of our listeners, readers, and our supporters, for you guys just making sure that we can continue to give you the content you're looking for and provide you a well-rounded picture of the news here in Alaska and beyond. And I think for us, we just want to say thank you because we're closing in on 150 reviews on the Apple Podcast app. And if you haven't had a chance, we just want to encourage you to do that. It takes just a short time, but we just want to encourage you to do that because it's something that helps us pop up on search engine and help people find us when they're looking for podcasts. And guys, we just want to thank you again. Well, today, it's not just me. I get to hang out with my fearless leader, Suzanne Downing, and we are going to talk about a lot of different things. Suzanne, first of all, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, and I'm really, really happy with this weather warming up a little bit. Quite honestly, once it gets into the teens, all is well with the world. I just don't really like it when it's under 10 degrees. I guess that's just me, but it's good to see us going into a little warming trend. And also relating to our podcast, Scott, thank you for producing this podcast for well over a year now and growing it to the point where we are now closing in. I think by today, we'll be closing in on 50,000 downloads for this podcast. And it doesn't even count the people who listen to it on YouTube and on Facebook, because we don't actually get to count those. Those are counted separately by those platforms. But really, it's been successful. And I appreciate all the listeners out there as well. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah, it is awesome. I mean, we've probably well on our way past 70,000 if you count all those other platforms, but it's been a great journey. And today we got a lot to talk about. I mean, we have so many different aspects of government and things that have dropped recently, especially this week, to hit on. And really, you're our subject matter expert of everything. I know you probably don't claim that, but I'll just say it out loud. So let's dive in. Let's talk about really one of the biggest news pieces that was out there this week, and that's about the Bronson administration and what is being deemed as a code violation when the Bronson administration and by extension the city water, essentially the fluoride was turned off, correct? For apparently for about 5 hours. Right. And so what that took a life on its own, and the ADN picked it up and ran a headline. And now this headline was actually very misleading. Was it not? I would say it's misleading in itself. But why don't you kind of talk to our listeners a little bit about what you saw and kind of your analysis of this, because it's mind-boggling what's going on right now in the legacy press.
Oh, well, right. So basically the ADN earlier in the week or late last week, they ran an opinion piece saying it's time for the city manager to be fired. And so they've already come out sort of against this administration. They've been against this administration from the beginning. And you can see from their own writing that this is a newspaper that's been invigorated by its hatred of all things conservative. They're furious. You know that if Forrest Dunbar was mayor, you would not be seeing the kind of reporting that you are seeing now from the ADN. And it's really sad. And people are sort of horrified because they consider the Binkley family to be a really upstanding family in Alaska. And yet they have purchased a newspaper that has reverted back to its old Alice Rogoff ways and being just essentially cause journalism. And we do a lot of cause journalism here at Must Read Alaska. but we admit it. We say,
that is a key thing, Suzanne. We admit that we have a conservative viewpoint.
We have a conservative viewpoint, and we lead with that because it's only fair to readers to know that we're going to be presenting a certain side of the story, because the rest of it's being presented by like you say, the legacy media. They're doing a very good job presenting the leftist side of things. And it's kind of just us out here with the Watchmen also doing some reporting on, what is the conservative perspective on some of these same issues. Well, so today, the newspaper continues to go anti-Dave Bronson, anti-Mayor Bronson, with this headline that says that Mayor Bronson temporarily shut off fluoridation of Anchorage water supply against city code. Well, that is absolutely false. It was not against city code for the water for the fluoride to be shut off. In fact, many times during the year, the fluoride is shut off from the city water for certain things. They have to recalibrate, or maybe they reach their limits of what's acceptable in the water supply, which is, I think it's 1.6 parts per gazillion or something, or for instance, or for instance, recently they had to shut it off because they had to replace a part and they couldn't get the part, and so the percentage would drop. But when you shut off the fluoride out of the water supply on the drip that it's on, you're not going to see any measurable difference, and there just wasn't any measurable difference. Now, the mayor said that he shut it off because the workers, when he was touring the plant, were complaining about coughing and having respiratory problems because of the fluoride. And he said, well, let's shut it off. Okay, so now you can imagine what things would be like if a worker had complained to the mayor about respiratory problems and coughing that they attributed to the fluoride, and he did nothing. He responded in no way. Well, then you would also see the leftist press get involved and say, the workers are complaining about the fluoride fumes and he did nothing. So, he took the appropriate action. I am now seeing the leftist media, including the Alaska Public Media, attacking him for, well, you turned it off, but then you turned it back on. Now you're not addressing the workers' complaints. So you see what they're doing here. They're just attacking.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
They're attacking them. But the city code is very clear. It says you have to have fluoride content, not more than 1.3 parts per million. And it's that's the top end threshold. It's not what you're supposed to, necessarily aim for. You just can't have any more than that. So I just think that the ADN is showing its hand here. Last week, calling for the dismissal of the city manager. This week, lying about the mayor in its headlines. I happen to know that that was pointed out to them, and they refused to correct it. So they're not going to correct their headline. They're going to stick by it that he is in violation against city code, because that's what sets them up for supporting a recall. If the mayor has done something in violation of city code, that allows people like Chris Constant and Forrest Dunbar and the Alaska Democratic Party to now issue a recall against the mayor. He's been in office for like 8 months.
Yeah, so a couple of things on my end. So the article does a great job of disguising any sort of facts and burying it in there. Now, a couple of things to note. Number one is the administration, it also said, listen, in October, there was a longer term shutdown of the fluoride within the facility for more than the 5 or so hours that's alleged that the fluoride was turned off. And that was a maintenance issue. So you have maintenance that has to happen that shuts down the fluoride within the water. Now, the thing that people don't realize, again, you said it earlier, it's not how much fluoride goes in, it's parts per million. And that is the thing. If you just sit there and say, well, he turned off the fluoride for 5 hours, that probably killed. I mean, that's sort of the tone, right? Fluoride
right.
being
oh my
shut
gosh,
off,
people are dying because he cut the fluoride for 5 hours. Oh, for Pete's sake.
And so in saying that, what they're doing is, again, crafting the narrative. Not only that, but in this very article, it mentions the landmine in the numerous allegations. So the article is not just talking about the fluoride, but that article that really focuses, and falsely with a really false narrative in the headline, focuses on the 3 allegations that the left-leaning blog that put all that stuff out mentioned. So now you're tying in more than just a fluoride issue. And then it goes further on to then talk with, for example, the chairman of the assembly there, or chairwoman, LaFrance. And LaFrance sets it up beautifully. We are concerned, so we should obviously look into that. What this does is it provides red meat in the water for all the Democrats, right? So now everybody's swarming the chum, and they're all putting in their opinions. You got Scott Kendall on Twitter saying, well, and this is great for him. He feels like, killing two birds with one stone here. Hey, the governor should look right into this right now, because this is serious allegation stuff. Listen, this is very much a nothing burger, as you would say. This is just a way to drum up negative media attention for both administrations, in this particular case, the Bronson administration. And nobody, and if you read these articles, nobody can actually pinpoint any source. If you've seen the redactions, or the retractions, I should say, of the Alaska Public Media article, it is astonishing.
So they keep changing their minds. They keep adjusting their story as they get other facts in. So they without admitting that they completely went out there on a limb with wrong information, they keep just altering it as they go along, and just whistling past the graveyard here that this story is just bull.
Absolutely. And so when you keep moving the goalposts, you get to determine who scores and who doesn't.
Yep.
And that's the problem. And so again, this is another example. Now you have the ADN. You have the very left-leaning assembly. You have many of the left-leaning blogs all focusing their ire right now on this fluoride issue. Meanwhile, the Bronson administration has come out and said, listen, in early October, we had a maintenance thing where we shut down for a couple of days. It's all about how many parts per million fluoride is within the water. That's the level you need to watch. Keeping the quote unquote, they like to simplify it like it's like cartoon where it's a lever where it's on and off. But to simplify it, to say that, oh, Bronson just decided to pull the lever down and shut everything off, like, he's the cat with the canary in his hand. It's oversimplifying a very complex issue, and they know that. And that's what they're good at. They're good at bringing it down to the simple and creating fear. And so now we can't trust the mayor because he turned off the fluoride, or asked to turn off the fluoride, or whatever the narrative they want to bring is, when in reality, this is nothing. I mean, for crying out loud, the Daily Beast picked this up. And we have national news about this, which
and you know why that is. That's because we have people who are, highly placed or well connected in government, people like Forrest Dunbar, people like Scott Kendall, who have connections at these major media outlets. I would not be surprised to find out that this weekend the Washington Post picks it up, because that's what they have. They've got people in these other organizations, Daily Beast, Washington Post. They will run a story on Bronson. I'll bet money on it.
Well, let me just say this. I do have an insider in the water treatment facility that I have asked this question about. And number one is, right now, this is a running joke within the plant. This is a running joke. And number two, he said, I can't even tell you how many times we shut off the fluoride to do maintenance on a regular basis. And that doesn't stop us from producing water that has the appropriate amount of fluoride within the parts per million. So the idea that this is some sort of, and again, from him verbatim, the idea that this is some sort of like crazy, far right leaning QAnon type of stuff is ridiculous, but it seems to be a joke within the office right now. And I just got that from a text.
Well, this is the narrative that they're going to be running. And if people read the story I ran earlier about how the ADN has been going after Amy Domboski for years, and they cannot stand her. And I ran clips of all the headlines they'd run against her, which were all false headlines, false narrative headlines. It's clear that they cannot stand Amy Domboski as a leader and would like to destroy her as city manager. And so their reporting on this at this point is going to be suspect. I don't think that the ADN can any longer say, well, that's our editorial department, they're different. No, they're not. They've got a staff of like 10 over there. They're all in it together. They talk with each other. You can't separate out the editorial department anymore from the news department.
Well, I would say that's probably true. I read the article that you wrote. And for those of you who are maybe looking for that didn't have a chance, it's under it's on mustreadalaska.com under the headline, ADN's history of bullying Amy Domboski continues, with newspaper calling for her to be fired as city manager. And here's what they do. What happened to sexism? You have what happened to This is amazing to me. And this is where I rant, and either you like this or you don't, but give me a second. It is amazing to me that in the world we live in today, with a hashtag Me Too movement, a equality of gender, and many other things, I won't even get into all of them, that you have a newspaper calling for the firing of a woman who is the city manager. And there is nobody on the left saying that's sexist. Now,
No.
I guarantee you, if it was Must Read Alaska doing that, and it was a liberal left-leaning city manager, you guarantee it. If I wrote it, Must Read Alaska.
Misogynistic, man.
Yeah, but no, it's rules for thee and not for me. It's the same thing with COVID. I mean, we're saying, hey, it's my body, my choice when it comes to a specific niche issue, but when it comes to vaccinations, nope, you need to follow in line, or you are an outsider. You are the problem. And listen, people are getting fed up of this. And I'm not talking people like red conservative Republicans. I'm talking centrists are getting issues. Look at the Biden administration. Just take a national view of this. People are fed up with this crap. And I'm fed up with it because, to me, this is a great example of exactly what's going on when people just go, yeah, I'm not going to read the ADN anymore. Yeah, I'm not going to get my newspaper. Yeah, I'm not going to watch KTUU. You know why? Because I'm just sick of being spoon-fed lies and garbage.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at right now.
And you see that Michael Tavoliero, who's one of our writers at Must Read Alaska, he's a senior contributor. He
got some catharsis.
He got his rant off his chest about it too, and that's at the top of our page right now. And something that we posted late last night was his rant about the ADN and saying it's really just time to demonetize them. In other words, walk away from them, walk away from their advertisers, and provide no support. And he had a pretty good rant there. I recommend it to people if you want to,
absolutely
see somebody sort of saying what a lot of us are thinking.
Hey, vote with your wallet. That's how you do it. You vote with your wallet. You vote with your feet and you vote with your wallet. And if this is the type of crap that's going to continually happen over and over again, I mean, listen, I'm just going to say this out loud. I know, Suzanne, you live rent free in a lot of these people's heads, and I love it. I really do love it. But the hypocrisy and the one-sidedness, and it's rules for me, not for thee kind of thing is abhorrent, and it's becoming almost comical at this point. Well, one of the things that I wanted to actually ask you about is, and as we continue on, again, this show wasn't supposed to be just all ADN, but the governor had a couple press conferences this week. One of them was on Tuesday to announce his People First Initiative plan program. And then he had a press conference on Wednesday, which I found rather interesting. He spent a good 4 to 5 minutes discussing the ADN in that particular newspaper and what his thoughts are on the way that they're portraying not just administration, but perhaps a lack of balanced coverage. Would that be a very PC way to put that?
Right. Yeah. So what he did is on Tuesday, he rolled out his People First initiative, which is an omnibus public safety initiative that he wanted to sort of separate out of the budget. He wanted to highlight that. And this is pretty typical when a governor has an initiative that they especially want everybody to pay attention to. They don't roll it out at the same time they do the budget because it kind of gets lost. They kind of do it in advance. And in past administrations, you would see something like Governor Parnell would roll out a Choose Respect initiative, and he'd do it separately. And then a few days later, or a few weeks later, he'd roll that into the budget, and then the whole budget goes out. So this People First initiative is a pretty important one. It's super important because we've got such a big problem with public safety in rural Alaska, and he's aware of that. But one of the interesting dynamics that was going on is that the day before Alaska Federation of Natives convened its annual convention, again, the ADN posted a negative hit piece on the Dunleavy administration saying they promised to build up troopers and public safety, but they haven't. And it was again a piece that talked about the tragedies that we see in rural Alaska when you have a lack of law enforcement. In fact, their headline said that people in rural Alaska are having to take cover from active shooters while Dunleavy does nothing to protect them by adding more troopers. It has been really hard to get troopers to go into rural Alaska, and that's been the case for a long, long time. That's why we had the VPSO program to begin with, the Village Public Safety Officer program, because You've got to have people in the villages who understand village life, understand the dynamics. It's hard to find a good qualified VPSO who doesn't have a lot of people out there in the village who might want to do this. Sorry, if you've got anything on your record like a DUI or a domestic violence, you're never going to be a VPSO. So it's hard to find VPSOs out of the villages because there's just a lack of qualified people. And so public safety remains a very big issue in rural Alaska, but the governor has been addressing it. And in fact, he has rebuilt a lot of the public safety components since he's been in office. And again, with the People First initiative, he's going to continue to rebuild. I ran a story on Sunday about, I think before the ADN story came out about how bad the troopers were, I ran a story on Sunday about how they're going to have the largest graduating class in decades coming up or the largest class in the Trooper Academy in decades, starting in February. Now, maybe not all those will graduate, but most of them will. And they'll go into various components of law enforcement in our state. They might become police officers, they might become VPSOs or troopers, and we need some more troopers. He's also, he rolled out in his budget that he's going to be increasing trooper pay and that they've done an amazing job recruiting troopers when they go to places like Seattle and Portland, where everybody's all about defunding the police. They're picking up people from Washington State Patrol who say, I quit. I'm not, Washington State Patrol lost a couple hundred people when they did the vaccine mandate from Governor Inslee. And some of those people are going to come north and work for us up here in Alaska. So I put out that story about the troopers being rebuilt. Kyle Hopkins put out a hit piece on the governor saying, it's his fault that there's so much violence in rural Alaska. One more thing I got to say about that. In rural Alaska, everybody has a gun. People are not taking cover from active shooters, like they say, any more than anywhere else. Every once in a while in rural Alaska, somebody goes nuts, gets a gun out and starts shooting up. But let me tell you, everybody's armed in rural Alaska. They are the most well-armed people in America. So the way that Kyle Hopkins characterized this is that as though nobody can do anything in rural Alaska to protect themselves, when that's just simply not the case.
Yeah, it definitely, the narrative was there, which is you have unhinged people that are just roaming around like it's a Western.
Shooting people.
Yeah, and there's no sheriff in town, quote unquote, to be able to handle that. Listen, you brought up a great point. You brought up a lot of great points. Number one is that the headline was absurd. The accusations are absurd, and I remember a couple years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, when there was the first Indigenous Peoples Day, and that was a topic that was in the Indigenous Peoples Day. There was an actual monologue said between various Alaska Native women who came up and were talking about the atrocities. So I say that because Kyle Hopkins' piece almost lambastes Dunleavy as the genesis of the issue, which is completely taken out of context and out of character and blatantly false. And this is the problem that we have, is that you have this guy who writes this. He's a part of a ProPublica.
ProPublica, he's paid for by this left-leaning ProPublica, so he's gonna do the left-leaning narrative because that's who pays his paycheck.
Right, and not only that, but then doesn't have the audacity to sit within the press conference to hear about this People's First program, and ostensibly, once we get to that point, hear about how, listen, there is a definite crafted narrative and there is a toxicity from the ADN towards any kind of conservative administration. And right now, Alaska's largest city has a conservative mayor, and the state is run by Governor Dunleavy, who's a conservative Republican. And that just seems to drive the ADN and its riders banana land. And we're seeing this left and right, or just left, I guess. And that's the problem I have, is that a lot of the allegations that were in that piece, again, ironically, behind a firewall, so you have to pay to read it, really just hits at the core of a lot of misconceptions. And you touched on many of them. And really the gross narrative of that is the village, especially rural Alaska, a lot of the villages are just being, are like CHOP or Chaz. They're just being controlled by people that are vigilantes. That's how it makes it sound. And the reality is that's just not true. But it certainly puts what? The main theme of all these things is fear. Bronson, Dunleavy, Dombrowski. It's all fear. We got to get the fear out. And I'll give this: the left is great at just drinking the Kool-Aid and just running with the talking points and the narrative and not asking questions, because it always seems like they're lockstep. That's my opinion on it.
Well, and with the newspaper there, the ADN, they've got these grants from ProPublica, which is it was founded by, I don't want to say George Soros, because I don't know that any significant Soros money was in there, but there are other wealthy billionaires that made just, gobs and gobs of money, but they are extremely liberal, and they have funded ProPublica as a left-leaning investigative journalism. And they've got kind of one way that they go. It was, anti-Trump, anti-Republican, and quite honestly, anti-American in many cases. They never report on anything that a Democrat would do. This is all anti-Republican reporting. So, you've got, I think, 2 positions now at the ADN. It's Kyle Hopkins, and then they've just gotten another grant for this local report, or Report America, and that will fund another position. So those people aren't so much answerable to their community as answerable to their funders. And they know the kind of reporting. If you go to ProPublica.org, you will see the kind of reporting that will be coming from the ADN. You will see all kinds of hit jobs on Republican governors, and you'll see what I'm talking about if you just go to ProPublica.org. That's who they are answerable to, because they want that grant money to keep on coming.
Well, I could tell you this. I think everything you need to know about the fact of the let's choose the right narrative is the fact that the Dunleavy comments during his press conference, which were very direct and aimed at that specific newspaper, the ADN, he called out specifically, there was zero coverage about that press.
You know what?
Zero.
That's a good point, because he went on for about 3 or 4 minutes at the end of his press conference, on his budget rollout. He said, now I'd like to talk about our mainstream media, and especially about our largest daily paper in our largest city, which is a phrase he said twice, because he said it with a little bit twist in his voice. He was pretty sarcastic. And talk about how that, Kyle Hopkins, after trashing the governor on public safety, didn't even bother to show up the next day for this big public safety rollout. He didn't bother to even call in. Instead, you had another reporter there, Alex de Marbon, called in, and he was the reporter on that issue that was so important that the day earlier they had to have their Pulitzer Prize winning guy write about it. But the next day, their Pulitzer Prize winning guy couldn't but be bothered to show up. So then when he rolls out the budget, who's there? Kyle Hopkins is sitting at the table, not just at the table. He is sitting at the first seat next to the governor's podium. And you could see his head through the entire budget rollout. You could see Kyle Hopkins' little head there at the bottom. He got right up into Mike Dunleavy's space there. He was going to make sure that he made the governor uncomfortable, or in some way, which I don't think he did. I think the governor just sort of ignored him. But the governor calls out the ADN and says, "Look, this newspaper is ridiculous in what it's pushing on the people of Alaska. To say that I'm anti-rural, I'm married to a woman from a native village where I believe he said, where they turn off the generator at 9:00 at night, every night, and where they hunt for their own food. And I'm proud of my wife. I'm proud of my children. I'm proud."
The man spent 20 years out in rural Alaska. What are you talking about?
Exactly. He said, "I have more friends out in rural Alaska than you do, Kyle." He didn't name him by name, but he really went on for some time. And we wrote a story about it. I wrote a story about it, hit job, that Kyle Hopkins had done, and Dunleavy's response. But no other member of the media bothered to write this story about what the governor had said about the media.
I'll do you one further.
Planet journalism.
I'll do you one further. I heard bupkis on social media about it, which is the height of irony, because there's usually always something. I figured they would have put, a lot of the left-leaning Twitterites out there in what I call Twitter Alaska would have said, "What a crybaby, oh, this, that."
Yeah.
Nothing, which says one thing. He nailed it.
Yeah.
That got called, and now they're playing, we'll just let it ride out. The governor just mentioned us, maybe not by name, but everybody knows who the largest newspaper in the largest city is in Alaska. And I mean, talk about just letting something fly right under the radar. We don't want to touch this. We don't want to touch this. So to me, that's a great example. And I'm going to switch a little bit because our time's running low here. But I want to say this to you. I'm not going to try to pump my tires, but I came to you and said,
let's pump your tires. Yeah, you did a great job on that story.
I wrote a piece that was intriguing to me because what I'm finding is that when you're talking about things like the left-leaning assembly is willing to jump on any delicious story with chum in the water that goes after the Bronson administration. And in this particular case, there was a few on the left-leaning side of the assembly that were saying, hey, we need more transparency. I mean, it's your usual suspects, most namely Christopher Constant. And he was just really going in. And I just said to you, I said, I can't do this anymore. I can't just let this go. So I wrote a piece, and you did a great job editing it as usual, of it's under the title Anchorage Assembly Building on Track Record of Trashing Transparency. And my point was this: we have an assembly, particularly the left-leaning side of that assembly, who is really trying to ride the wave of bashing the Bronson administration because they take great pleasure in that, and saying, we need more transparency. What's going on? We want to see this. I know LaFrance and Constant both wrote a letter to the administration saying, we want all your text messages, your emails from this date forward. Yet I wrote 3 instances when a lack of transparency was so evident. And the 3 were this: back in 2020, when they closed down the assembly and violated the Open Meetings Act and essentially talked about, formed, and eventually passed 2 of the most controversial legislative ordinances that we've seen in a long time, AO 2020-65, which was ostensibly called the conversion therapy ban, and AO 2020-66, which was using CARES Act funds to purchase dilapidated buildings to try to create some sort of, I think the term we used was homeless industrial
complex. Yeah, it's a services to attract more vagrants to our city.
One of the buildings was so out of repair that it would have cost more than what was allotted to it, but that's not the point. They did all that behind closed doors without public testimony or anything. Then you fast forward to this year with the mandate for the masking. There were 6 nights of grueling and real public testimony, and they pulled a bait and switch on purpose. They had their meeting. LaFrance, the chairwoman, promised that they'd reconvene public testimony on Wednesday. And what did they do? 15 minutes before the end of the meeting, oh, we're going to introduce an emergency ordinance for the mask mandate. Nobody was there to publicly testify. It passed. And once again, the lack of transparency and the swindling of the assembly, the left-leaning assembly, this comes on the heels of a day before one of the assembly members, Cameron Perez Verdia, writing a piece calling, hey, we should just do an emergency ordinance. And remember, this is because cases were falling and the narrative was starting to lose steam that we needed to do this.
That's right. He did. He laid the foundation a couple of days earlier saying, hey, we should just do an emergency ordinance. And that signaled to everybody exactly what was going to go down. So although Suzanne LaFrance, who's the chair of the assembly, said, don't worry, we're going to get through all the testimony. Everybody's going to be able to testify. They did a bait and switch at the very end. They said, yeah, no more testimony, emergency ordinance. And they just passed it on through. It was absolutely disgraceful what they did.
Absolutely. And you called it. You wrote a great piece on it. Like, hey, is the assembly going to create an emergency ordinance? And you nailed it. They did. And now finally, one of the most egregious things, and again, talk about a lack of transparency. This comes right into the face of that. This is hitting it head on, is this idea, this ordinance, this proposed ordinance about practically rewriting Title 28 of the municipal code, which directly correlates to elections. And we know around here, election integrity is always on the forefront of a lot of people's minds, particularly those who like to read about Must Read Alaska and hear what we have to say. I'm going to preface this that in the 2021 mayoral campaign, Must Read Alaska was at the forefront. You specifically were at the forefront of a lot of shenanigans that were going on down at the Ship Creek elections building.
Yeah, we were watching some really crazy stuff go on down there. And Barbara Jones, who's the city clerk, has never had scrutiny before because, the mail-in ballot has only been going on since 2018. And we haven't had super, super close elections where it was highly contested. And we haven't ever had a campaign like the Mayor Bronson campaign, where they were really vigilant. They wanted to really keep an eye on it. And once we did start keeping an eye on it, we saw that there were some real problems there are total lack of transparency and lack of sort of chain of custody on those ballots. The way that they're running our elections in Anchorage is an absolute disgrace. But like you said, now they're going to get ready to rewrite Title 28 at the request of Barbara Jones, the municipal clerk, that will prohibit people from being able to go in and observe ballot counting. And they're going to require any ballot observer to have signed up 22 days in advance, which is almost impossible for campaigns to do. It's hard enough to get volunteers, and then you just don't know when that volunteer will be available. And let's just say something happens in that volunteer's life and they can't go do ballot observing. Well, then you don't get to observe because you can't substitute somebody in. They're going to we've never before seen them clamp down on election transparency like they're doing here in Anchorage now.
Absolutely. And I think one of the most egregious potential rewrites of Title 28 is the fact that the actual person who needs to be held accountable and provide such transparency will be the person who can rewrite the observer handbook at any point and enact it at any point, these new rules based upon the whim of her feeling.
That's right. That's exactly right. So Barbara Jones is going to be able to, control the behavior and the movements of all observers. And she can then, if she didn't like something that's going on, she can go into her computer, rewrite the handbook and say, we have new rules. Our rules say that you can't wear purple in here. You can't wear red. You have to stand on your head. And they're also saying that you can't have cameras in there. You can't record it. Heck, we're getting to the point where we're putting cameras on police officers all the time, but we can't put cameras on our ballot counting. I'm sorry. This is not acceptable.
So and you're absolutely right. So this just goes into the face of when you hear the assembly, particularly the left-leaning assembly, guac, squawk, yell, chirp, whatever you want to call it, the Bronson administration about transparency. Keep in mind, people, that the assembly is enacting legislation that is actively working against transparency. And in this particular case, currently right now, as we speak, when it has to do with elections. And you and I both know, Suzanne, a lot of our readers are very, very concerned about the way elections are run, both the fact that we have mail-in voting and the fact of how we count those mail-in votes. And there's an interesting quote on here that you were very astute to have added in there, which is this: those who vote decide nothing. Those who count the vote decide everything. And that's very true. And the fact that Must Read Alaska, along with the Bronson administration, maybe for the first time in her life, held accountable all the actions that were being done, late night meetings after everybody was sent home, the fact that ballots were coming in on the side of the building, the fact that doors within the building were left open in a secure building, the fact that they had people that were still left over, the fact that they had people that were bringing in ballots and then leaving with other bags. And
don't forget, they were also taking home the keys to the vault, to the ballot vault. They actually took not once, not twice, I mean multiple times. They took home the key to the secure vault where the ballots were in. I mean, you can't just leave the building with the keys.
No, and not only that, but also having assembly members come in with flowers to give to the municipal clerk who is in the middle of counting ballots for a candidate that you are helping.
Not only that, let me tell you about that. So Chris Constant walks in with those flowers, and Barb Jones was busy. She was on her computer. She was doing something. He didn't just leave those flowers for her. Now, remember, Chris Constant on the assembly was working on the Forrest Dunbar campaign. He was there as an observer for the Forrest Dunbar campaign. So she was busy, and he didn't just leave the flowers on the desk. He waited for a full half hour until she could come out so that he could make sure to hand those flowers to her personally.
And deliver those flowers.
And that was a good $100 bouquet of flowers. That was a nice bouquet.
Listen, if I'm the city clerk, the last thing I want is anybody to have any sort of second guess about my integrity when it comes to elections. And yet Barbara Jones has no problem at least accepting flowers from a sitting assemblyman who is working with another assemblyman running for mayor and working on the campaign to watch what's going on while providing that. I mean, the web of entanglement is crazy. And I'll end with this. Okay. I'll end with this. One of the things that's really egregious, one of the things that I'm having a really hard time wrapping my head around, particularly in the points that were presented, is the fact that we are putting so much power into the limited hands of individuals. We're putting a lot of power into a small number of hands. And that should concern any resident of Anchorage right now, because the most powerful person during an election year resides in that chamber, actively hostile against the current administration, particularly during the election. We reported about this. Her demeanor and actions towards the Bronson administration volunteers were egregious. They were not very kind at all. And as we continue down this road, and as people get more and more irritated with the fact that we're having these mail-in votes and how these are going to look long term, I would highly encourage those residents who are concerned. The only way you're going to change any of this is to vote. You have to vote. And I feel like, and if you look across the country, mail-in voting directly benefits Democratic candidates by far. And so this is one of the rarities where mail-in voting actually benefited a conservative candidate. And it gets me to my last point. The fact that in this Title 28 rewrite, the option to prevent campaigns from curing votes is a direct attack on the fact that the Bronson administration was able to cure an absurd amount of votes and actually win based on that. It is a direct attack on what happened in this last election. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And so what we see them doing is that, oh, it's working for you. Okay, well, we've got to rig the system so it doesn't work for you. We thought we had this rigged, so we're gonna have to make some adjustments. You don't get to come in and watch the ballots being counted anymore. And so this is interesting because in our country, we've tended to expand people's rights. And now we're going to contract them as it pertains to Anchorage voting. This is a very serious issue, and I would hope that readers and listeners, keep apprised of this. There's one more public hearing on this. All of the comments on the last public hearing on this Title 28 rewrite were negative, except for one this last week. And I guess there's one more hearing on the 21st, and I encourage the public to really pay attention. This is kind of boring stuff in a way, Title 28. That's the kind of thing that makes your head kind of spin, but it involves transparency in elections that are already not very transparent. And I know we're running out of time, but we do have way too many registered voters in Anchorage. And so we've already got lots and lots of problems with the trust in our elections. We don't need to add more problems by telling people they can't watch what's going on in the counting room.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Well, I got to close it down. We had a great conversation today. This was fun.
I know.
It's always fun.
It's
always fun. Well, guys, thank you so much. Again, this is we're heading to the Christmas season, so we're going to try to make sure we keep regular with you guys in terms of episodes. But we want to thank all our listeners, our readers, and our supporters. And if you love what we do and want to continue to help us provide that sort of content, we're bringing on an education reporter right now, which we're really excited about, to bring you more content on the education realm here, which is important. You can do so by going to mustreadalaska.com. At the top right, there's a donation part, a support aspect of what we do here. And we'd love for you to support us. Anything helps. And we are graciously, we're just humbled. Gracious is another word. We're humbled by the amount of support we already have. And we just want to continue to provide this content. If you haven't liked us on Facebook, we're trying to get to 25,000 likes before the end of the year. And we're well on our way there.
Getting close.
Getting close. And also, if you haven't subscribed and hit the notification bell on YouTube, we got a lot of great content on there as well. And if you haven't, we are on all different platforms: Twitter, Parler, MeWe, Rumble, the works. And we're all under the same handle, Must Read Alaska, in one word. Well, guys, thank you so much. Suzanne, thanks for joining with me today.
Good to see you, and I'll see you next week.
Absolutely. Okay, Alaska. Until next time, take care.